My son-in-law handed me a manila envelope across my own kitchen table and told me I was being bought out. Not asked. Told. My daughter sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the window behind my head, the way she used to do when she was 12 and didn't want to admit she'd broken something. "Dad," she said, "it's the best thing for everyone." The envelope had my name typed on the front. Clifford Wesley Drummond, it said. Like I was a stranger. Like I hadn't built the business whose letterhead was printed on the documents inside. I looked at my son-in-law. He had on a new blazer. Gray. The kind men wear when they want to look serious. He'd been wearing a lot of those lately, ever since the board voted him in as president 6 weeks ago. My board. The board I'd assembled over 30 years. "We appreciate everything you've contributed," he said. I'd known this man for 11 years. I'd watched him propose to my daughter on the back porch of this house. I'd lent him money when their first apartment fell through, and now he was sitting in my kitchen telling me he appreciated my contributions. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push the envelope back across the table. I picked it up, tucked it under my arm, and said, "I'll have my attorney look it over." My daughter finally looked at me then. I think she expected tears, or anger, or something she could manage. What she got was a 63-year-old man in a flannel shirt who stood up, refilled his coffee mug, and walked out to the garage. I sat in there for a long time with the lights off. Just me and the smell of motor oil and old wood, same as it had been since I first bought this place in 1987. The business had started in this garage. A pressure washing outfit, 3 employees, a second-hand truck with a leaky gasket. I'd grown it into a commercial facilities management company with contracts across 7 states, 41 full-time employees, a regional office in Columbus. My son-in-law had been the operations director I hired to help me slow down. That was 4 years ago. I hadn't planned to slow down that much. My attorney's name is Bev Holloway. She's been practicing out of the same office on Maple Street in Dayton since before my daughter was born. I called her from the garage that evening, still sitting in the dark. "Don't sign anything," she said before I'd finished explaining. "I know. Bring it in tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was angry, though I was. Because I kept thinking about how it had happened so gradually I almost didn't notice. The board meetings I'd been nudged out of. The contracts renewed without my signature on the approval chain. The way my son-in-law had started referring to the company as our operation in calls with clients I'd brought in before he'd ever set foot in the building. I should back up. My wife passed 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer, swift and cruel. After that, my daughter and I grew close in the way that grief forces people together, not always wisely. She was 28, freshly married to a man I barely knew, and I leaned on her more than I should have. She started coming into the office, helping with invoices, then with staffing, then with client relations. She had good instincts. I gave her more responsibility. It felt natural. It felt like legacy. When she brought her husband on as operations director, I told myself I was being generous. Maybe I was. Maybe I was just tired and lonely and mistaking proximity for succession planning. For the first 2 years, he was good. Better than good. He streamlined our scheduling software, renegotiated 2 vendor contracts, cut overhead in the Columbus office without losing a single account. I told people he was the son I never had, which I realize now was the kind of thing you say when you stop paying close attention. The change was gradual, the kind you only recognize looking back. He started CCing the board on emails before copying me. He started attending Chamber of Commerce events in my place. To save you the drive, Dad. He started using that word dad in professional settings, which at first I thought was warmth and eventually understood was strategy. It reminded everyone in the room of the relationship. It reminded them I was old. When my cardiologist told me to cut my hours after a minor episode last spring, I took 3 weeks off. When I came back, 2 things had changed. My parking spot had been quietly reassigned to a visitor space, and 3 board members had new direct contacts listed in the company directory. My son-in-law's cell phone, not mine. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. What I did instead, quietly, over the following 4 months, was something I should explain. 20 years ago, when I first started landing large commercial accounts, hospital networks, university facilities, regional hotel chains, I created a separate LLC for contract management, Drummond Service Partners. A tax attorney in Cincinnati had suggested it for liability purposes. The board had reviewed it. Everyone signed off. At the time, it was administrative scaffolding, nothing more. Over the years, though, I'd been careful about how new major contracts were structured. Not everyone, not obviously, but the relationships I'd built personally, the ones that came because a facilities director knew my name and trusted my handshake, those agreements listed Drummond Service Partners as the primary service entity. Drummond Facilities Management, the main company, as the operational provider. No one had ever looked closely at the distinction. Why would they? Profits were up. Clients were happy. The structure held. When my son-in-law started nudging me toward the exit, I pulled those files and counted. 14 accounts. Combined, they represented roughly 58% of the company's annual recurring revenue. Not hidden, not improper, just structured in a way that no one besides Bev and my accountant had ever bothered to read carefully. Bev read it carefully the morning I brought her the buyout offer. She took off her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at me with an expression I'd only seen her use once before, when she'd caught a contractor trying to renegotiate a signed lease. "Does your son-in-law know about Drummond Service Partners?" she asked. "He knows it exists," I said. "He's never asked what it does." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This buyout offer assumes the company's full revenue base. It doesn't account for the contractual structure of your 14 primary accounts." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." She picked up her glasses again. "Then this offer is not what they think it is." I drove home and made a sandwich and sat on the porch for a while. It was April in Ohio, still cold enough to see your breath in the morning, and the yard needed aerating. Ordinary things, the kind of things I used to put off because I was always in the office. My phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. It was the facilities director for Hargrove Medical Group, our largest single account. We'd done business together for 9 years. He didn't bother with small talk. "I got an email from your son-in-law," he said. "Says he's my new primary contact. Wanted to confirm that with you directly." I took a slow breath. What did the email say exactly? That you were transitioning into an emeritus advisory role and that all operational questions should be directed to him going forward. A pause. "I don't love the sound of that." "Neither do I said. "Who do I have a contract with?" "Drummond Service Partners," I said. "Same as you've had since 2016. Another pause, longer this time. "And you're still with Drummond Service Partners?" "I am." "Then nothing changes on my end," he said. "I'll be honest with you. We signed with you because you return calls on a Sunday. I don't know this other fellow well enough to trust him with a 140,000 square foot hospital campus." When the call ended, I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the particular exhaustion that comes from being right about something you wish you'd been wrong about. My daughter called at 4:40. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad, why is Hargrove calling us confused about their contract?" "Did you read the contract?" I asked. "What?" "The Hargrove contract. Did you read it, or did you rely on the summary in the operations folder?" A silence. "We reviewed the account profile. The account profile your husband prepared." Another silence, different in quality from the first. Dad. "I'm not angry," I said, which was only partially true. "But I'd suggest you and your husband sit down with Bev before you send any more emails to my clients." I used the word "my" deliberately. She heard it. 3 days later, Bev called me from the board meeting I hadn't been invited to. "You'd have appreciated this," she said. Her voice had that dry quality it gets when she's holding something back. "Tell me." "Your son-in-law opened by calling the LLC structure an undisclosed conflict of interest. He used the phrase breach of fiduciary duty twice in the first 5 minutes. I waited. Then 2 board members asked to see the original operating agreement for Drummond Service Partners. The one approved in 2004. She paused. It took about 8 minutes for the room to go quiet. "Which 2 board members?" "Rutherford and Anita Moe." That surprised me. Anita had been the most enthusiastic vote for my son-in-law's presidency. They read the contractual language aloud. Primary service entity, Drummond Service Partners. Operational provider, Drummond Facilities Management. I exhaled. The board asked her son-in-law whether he'd reviewed the contractual architecture before sending those client emails, Bev continued. He said he'd relied on the executive summaries. There it was, the summaries, the polished version that shows revenue without showing structure. They're not talking about litigation, Bev said. Your structure is clean. They know they'd lose. What they're talking about is exposure. Fortune accounts, 58% of recurring revenue structured outside their direct control. She paused again. They want to talk about a formal partnership agreement between the company and Drummond Service Partners, long-term, guaranteed minimums. They fired me and now they want to hire my LLC, I said. Essentially. What did my daughter say? Bev hesitated the way she does when she's being careful. She objected initially, said it undercut her husband's authority. Then one of the board members said something I think you'd want to hear verbatim. Go ahead, he said. Authority without revenue is decoration. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside my window, the yard still needed aerating. The maple tree my wife had planted was just starting to bud. Is there any talk of reconsidering the buyout? I asked. They're drafting a counter-proposal, a real one, not what they handed you across your kitchen table. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat there and thought about my wife, which I do more often than I tell anyone. She'd liked my son-in-law well enough at first. He's ambitious, she would have said, which with her meant something more complicated than a compliment. She would have told me to be careful. I should have been more careful sooner. That evening my daughter came to the house alone. She knocked, which she hadn't done in years. I let her in and put the kettle on without being asked. She sat at the kitchen table, same chair as before, and for a while neither of us spoke. I didn't know, she said finally. About the contract structure. I know you didn't. He told me it was a formality, that the LLC was just a tax vehicle. It was, I said, until it wasn't. She wrapped both hands around the mug I set in front of her. She'd done that since she was little, even with cocoa mugs that were too hot to hold properly. I didn't want to push you out, she said quietly. I thought if he ran the operations side, you'd finally rest. After your heart thing, I was scared. I believed her. That's what made it complicated. Good intentions and bad architecture can produce the same damage. You should have talked to me, I said, not maneuvered around me. I know. And he should have read the contracts before he sent those emails. She almost smiled at that. Almost. What happens now? She asked. That depends on what your husband wants. Does he want control, or does he want the company to survive? She looked at her mug. He's angry. He'll get over it, or he won't. But the clients aren't waiting on his emotions. She was quiet for a while. The kettle finished. I poured my own cup and sat across from her. I don't want this to become a war, she said. It's not a war, I told her. It's a conversation we should have had 2 years ago. She left around 8 o'clock. I watched her headlights back out of the driveway and thought about the night I taught her to drive in this same driveway, how she'd oversteered every single time and been furious with herself about it. Over the following week, things moved quickly. 3 more clients called requesting clarification about their contracts. 2 of them asked specifically for me. My accountant, a quiet man named George who'd done my books for 18 years, told me the board's financial advisor had requested a full audit of Drummond Service Partners. George said to let them. Everything was clean. Everything had been clean for 20 years. On a Wednesday morning, my son-in-law came to the house. Without my daughter. He was still wearing the gray blazer. He looked like he hadn't slept well. I let him in, and didn't offer coffee. He sat down and put both hands flat on the table. I recognized the gesture. It's what people do when they want to look decisive. You've put this company in a difficult position, he said. I structured contracts. I said, that's not the same thing. You routed revenue through an LLC you control, with board approval, in 2004, which is documented. His jaw tightened. You knew this would be a problem if you ever left. I knew it would be a problem if I was pushed, I said. That's different. He looked at the table for a moment. What do you want? It was the first honest question he'd asked me since this started. I want the clients I built relationships with to be served well, I said. I want the employees who've been with this company for 15 and 20 years to still have jobs, and I want to be respected as the person who built this, not managed out of it like a liability. You're 63, he said. I'm aware. The board thinks. The board, I said, approved my LLC structure unanimously and has spent 20 years benefiting from the contracts I brought in. They can think whatever they like. The math doesn't change. He sat back. First time he'd moved since he sat down. They're going to offer you a formal partnership, he said. It sounded like it cost him something to say it. I know. You're going to take it. I haven't decided. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen from him before. Not anger, not calculation, something closer to genuine confusion. Why wouldn't you take it? I thought about how to answer that, because a partnership built on panic isn't a partnership. It's a truce, and I'm too old to spend my time managing a truce. He left without shaking my hand. Bev called the next morning. The board had formalized their offer, a 3-year strategic partnership between Drummond Service Partners and Drummond Facilities Management, guaranteed minimum payments, performance escalators, and something I hadn't expected, a 6% advisory equity stake, non-voting but profit participating. They're also asking, Bev said carefully, whether you'd consider returning as chairman emeritus, ceremonial, but with a formal consulting role on major contract renewals. And my son-in-law remains president, operational authority, but with a clause requiring your sign-off on any contract involving a Drummond Service Partners account. I walked to the window. The maple tree had leafed out fully while I wasn't paying attention. He agreed to that, I asked. The board gave him the same choice they gave Camille in your story, Bev said, then caught herself. Sorry, I mean, they gave him limited options. He agreed to it, she confirmed. I thought about it for 2 days, not because I was uncertain about the structure, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't agreeing out of vanity. Coming back to prove something was a worse reason than leaving. In the end, I called Bev and told her I'd accept the partnership terms, but not the emeritus title. No ceremonial role, I said. I'll consult on contracts as a contractor, paid, structured, defined, not as a gesture. They'll accept that. Then we have a deal. The paperwork took another week. When it was done, my daughter came over again. This time she didn't knock. She used her key, which felt right. We sat on the porch. It was warm enough by then that the maple gave shade. He's not happy, she said. I know. But he'll be fine. He's good at what he does. She paused. He thought the title was the whole thing. A lot of people do, I said. She leaned back in her chair. Mom would have handled this better than both of us. Your mother would have seen it coming 3 years earlier and said something at the dinner table that sounded like a compliment and wasn't. My daughter laughed. A real one, the kind that comes unexpected. I hadn't heard that in a while. The divorce they tried to do to my professional life didn't happen. What happened instead was harder to describe. A reorganization of trust. Not restored, exactly. More like rebuilt on different materials. My son-in-law and I have a working relationship now that's cordial and clear. We don't pretend it's more than that. Some things you can't unsay across a kitchen table. What I think about now, when I sit on this porch in the evenings, is the difference between what I planned and what I prepared for. I never planned for my own daughter to hand me a buyout envelope. I never wanted that, but somewhere in the back of my mind, and the way you know a storm is coming even when the sky is still blue, I had made sure that if the ground shifted, I wasn't standing on someone else's foundation. I built this company in a garage that smells like motor oil and old wood. I built it before my son-in-law knew my daughter's name. I built it through a recession and a pandemic, and the 11 longest months of my life after my wife died. Nobody hands you that. You structure it. Carefully, legally, patiently, so that when someone slides an envelope across your kitchen table and tells you what you're worth, you can pick it up, tuck it under your arm, and let your attorney explain to them how the math actually works. I'm 63. I have more mornings ahead of me than I sometimes let myself believe, and not a single one of them will be spent being managed out of something I built. If any of that sounds familiar, if you've ever been handed a number that didn't account for what you actually created, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and tell me what you built, because sometimes the only people who understand this particular kind of fight are the ones who've had to fight it quietly, without anyone watching, in a garage with the lights off. I keep thinking about that envelope, The way it sat on my own kitchen table with my full name typed on it like I was a stranger in a house I'd owned for 37 years. There's something about that image that tells the whole story before the story even starts. Not the betrayal exactly, but the assumption behind it. The assumption that because I was 63 and had handed someone a title, I had also handed him everything underneath it. What I've come to understand is that what happened to me wasn't really about my son-in-law. He did what people do when they mistake position for foundation. He saw a title, thought it was the whole building, and started knocking out walls before he'd ever read the blueprints. That's not unusual. That's human. What matters is what you've quietly built beneath the floor while no one was paying close attention. I don't think I'm a particularly smart man. I'm a man who showed up for 30 years, through a recession that took half my competitors, through the year after my wife died when I barely remember driving to the office. I showed up and I did the work and I made sure the people who depended on that work could depend on me. That kind of consistency isn't glamorous. Nobody writes about it. But it compounds. It accumulates the way savings do, slowly, invisibly, until the day someone tries to take something from you and discovers there's a lot more there than they accounted for. Beth used to tell me that good contracts are written for the day the relationship goes bad. I thought that was cynical when I was young. I understand now that it's just honest. You don't build legal structure because you distrust people. You build it because you respect the fact that circumstances change, that people change, that the man who shakes your hand today might be handing you an envelope 5 years from now. Preparing for that isn't paranoia, it's integrity. It's the responsible thing to do for every person whose livelihood runs through your decisions. My daughter asked me once, during all of this, whether I was angry. I told her the truth, which is that I was, a little, but that anger wasn't the thing running the show. What was running the show was something quieter, a kind of refusal, a refusal to be defined by someone else's version of what I was worth. That's the part I want anyone watching this to hold on to. Not the legal structure, not the LLC, not any of the mechanics. Those are just tools. What matters is whether you know, in the place where it counts, what you've actually built, whether you've been honest enough with yourself to see it clearly, and whether you've had the patience to protect it the right way, through work and preparation and a willingness to sit with uncertainty without flinching. My wife used to say that quiet people carry the most. She meant it as comfort, I think. I started to hear it as instruction, the things worth keeping, self-respect, the trust of people who've worked beside you for 20 years, the clarity that comes from knowing you never cut corners. Those don't show up on an org chart. They show up on the morning when someone slides an envelope across your table, and you can pick it up without your hand shaking. I'm 63. I built something in a garage with a leaky roof and no guarantees. Nobody gave it to me, and nobody gets to take it with a typed piece of paper. That's not anger talking. That's just arithmetic.